Hello and welcome to the Leaders Council podcast, the podcast for the people who run the country and the people who keep the country running. You join us here on an overcast day in a rather deserted city of Westminster as once again we ensure that we have a variety of differing perspectives on leadership. I'm Scott Challoner and I'm joined on the air today by James Cotton. James is the founder and managing director of One Space Media, a digital agency in Cambridge which creates powerful brands, websites and digital projects that accelerate business growth. James, welcome to the programme and it's great to have you on the air with us today.
Thanks very much, Scott. I'm really pleased to be on the show.
It's an absolute pleasure having you. Now, as I say, the purpose of this podcast is to gather a variety of perspectives on the topic of leadership. And what I would like to get an idea of first and foremost, James, is what that word leader actually means to you personally.
Well, being a leader or, why the term leadership, I mean, for me, it isn't about authority, it's about inspiration. And I think, it's about striving to be better at whatever you do and constantly learning and sharing that experience with others as widely as you can.
I think you're absolutely right in saying that it's important as a leader to be able to inspire people. And would you say that that's certainly a focus on your own leadership style as well?
Definitely, 100%. I mean, I've never sort of been one at the top of the hierarchical tree barking out orders. I'm very interested in learning from my peers and my staff and everyone around me in the world and trying to better myself and use that knowledge to help other people.
Exactly right. And do you think that good leadership sometimes is as recognised as it should be in the UK? Because what I do think is that when we think about leadership generally, we are quite tempted to instantly think of fame and celebrity and sports personalities, politicians, those sorts of individuals. And in the business world especially, people who don't stick their heads above the parapet, who go about their business day to day quite quietly, but are also very, very effective leaders in their own right, in their own form of leadership, they can very much go unnoticed, can't they?
Well, definitely. I think that, leadership, I think in some ways when you think about some of the adjectives to describe leadership, I think confidence does come into that. And I think that whether leaders choose whether or not to publicise themselves, if you like, through LinkedIn. I mean, we all know all these kind of influencers that are out there, which are, very popular in the media. It's difficult for those leaders around the country running small firms and things like that to actually have a voice, but they may not necessarily want a voice outside of kind of close circle.
Absolutely, because leadership comes in many different forms, doesn't it? And there are some leaders who do like to stick their head above the parapet and be very much there and at the head of everything for all to see, as it were, especially in the public eye. But for some people, they prefer essentially to just kind of get on with it behind closed doors, don't they?
Well, definitely. And I think that, as you said, leadership comes in many different forms. And I think that depending on the situation, different qualities are necessary in different types of leaders. I mean, a leader in the military has a very different set of qualities from a leader in the business world, for example, or, a leader in the media. And I think that, when it comes to myself, I think that really, for me, it's really about the confidence to make decisions, but also the confidence to learn from those mistakes and to think about, the history of everything that you've learned and how it creates the persona that you want to portray as a leader. I mean, obviously I employ a bunch of staff, but I think leadership comes in many, many forms beyond that, in the family, in friends, in your community. And I think that the more that, you can strive to be a better person and put that onto other people, I think that, that actually, for me, makes you a good leader.
And do you think it's possible to actually be a good leader without, as you say, trying things, making mistakes, getting things wrong and learning from them? That's important in one's development, isn't it?
I mean, for me, I really don't think. I think you have to be honest with yourself that you're not infallible. You're going to make mistakes. I think that we don't learn from doing things right. We learn from doing things wrong. And I think that we have to have the maturity and the confidence to accept when we do fail or when we make mistakes, that we understand and we learn from them, and we try to make sure that we do things better in the future. And I think that's just around the kind of cyclical process of becoming a better leader over time.
Yeah, and I think for some younger generations of leaders, sometimes that fear of failure and that fear of criticism can sometimes sort of hinder them in their journey, can't it? Whereas really what we should be saying is to embrace failure, embrace mistakes, and be willing to learn from them to make yourself better and really improve business as a whole.
Well, I think that, I don't know if you have children, but, I've got 3 children myself, and I look at their different stages of education and see their frustration, for example, when they get a maths problem wrong or something like that. And actually, and it's about reinforcing the fact that, it's okay to get things wrong. That's the point. You just keep working at things until you get them right, and you remember the journey that you've been on, and that actually makes you stronger as a person.
I would certainly agree with that. And I think you do have to go on that journey. And if we do think about that idea of the journey for a moment again there, James, do you think that great leaders are born great leaders, or do you think they develop into great leaders and learn the art of becoming a leader throughout their development?
I mean, I don't think you're born a great leader. I think it's probably part of a wider set of circumstances. How you were brought up. Whether you may have been part of adversity, or you may have had a difficult life, or you may have had a great life. You might have had good parents that were good leaders that you've learned from, and you're transposing those qualities onto yourself. Or it may be that you've actually come from adversity, and that's made you more resilient and things like that. So I think a lot of it comes from the kind of societal or family kind of setup that you've been brought up in.
And I think there are some things also that you do have to have that can't necessarily be taught. So, for example, some great leaders out there do have a certain self-motivation, a certain drive. And those are the things, again, that you can't necessarily teach. That's one thing that does really have to come from within.
Yeah, I think that's something that, you've got to have that drive within you, that motivation. And I think that, for people to be inspired by leaders, those leaders have to be inspiring themselves. They have to be motivational. They have to talk with confidence, and they have to project this confidence so that people believe in them and can rally around them. I think that's very, very important. And I think that's a skill which is, or a virtue, should we say, which doesn't come naturally to a lot of people. And I think it's something that you have to work very, very hard in to be a very, very confident and great communicator.
I certainly see where you're coming from. Communication is hugely important. And we talked a lot about inspiration there as well, and the importance for leaders to inspire. Are there any examples of leaders out there who've maybe been an inspiration to you, James, throughout your career?
That's interesting. I have to say, I was thinking about this before school, and I have to say that my parents actually have been very, very inspirational. I mean, my mother, she started and ran a very, very large charity to support the education of girls in Africa. And she worked at it from selling cakes on the market to building it up to be one of the most respected girls' education charities in the world, supporting over 1.5 million kids. And she's out of it now, but it's actually the journey that she went on of learning was inspiring for me when I grew up. And, my dad's been an entrepreneur as well and has run companies, and watching the difference in their approaches actually as I was growing up was very, very inspiring. And I think that to see one in the commercial world and one in the charity space actually gave me a lot of experience about being a leader in different contexts. So I think that, it's maybe a little cliche to say my parents, but I think that's the answer I'd like to give.
Yeah, it's interesting that you say, obviously, talking about your parents being great leaders is a bit of a cliche, because sometimes the greatest leaders are, of course, people who are parents, are mentors, those sorts of individuals. And again, it links back to this idea, doesn't it, that sometimes we might think of leaders as being people who are really prominent and being people in the public eye, but that isn't necessarily the case. It can be people in any walk of life.
Yeah. I think definitely. I think, of course, you've got people who are in the limelight, you've got politicians, you've got strong politicians that you may know, you've got business leaders that you may know. Of course, I've got lists as long as you're on, and it's added to every single day. But I think that, for me, the greatest leaders are those who are making kind of micro impacts, helping in their communities, taking their own initiative to try and, fix problems or to help people. And for me, I get most inspired by people who sort of take on these community initiatives without any reason for reward. It's just out of empathy and altruism.
So based upon your experience then, James, if you were to give advice to the next generation of emerging leaders, what would you tell them?
Well, I think that for me, honesty is one of the most important things. I think that as a leader, I think we have a duty to follow good governance, to try and make sure that the actions that we take are honest and that we're true to ourselves, because I think that a lot of leaders or perceived leaders can come unstuck very, very quickly if they've been dishonest in any way. And these things can happen to them later in their lives, and it can sort of wreck their lives in some way. I think that being a leader as well is about being a great listener, being very, very open to learning, and being able to take those thoughts and things that you hear and the knowledge that you take, and being able to reflect that back as a good communicator, and inspire people, motivate people, be a role model, be someone to look up to. And I think that. I think you just have to have the confidence to make those decisions, even if you're getting them wrong. But as long as you do them with empathy and honesty, I think that, leadership is come your way.
I think that's incredibly sound advice for future generations for sure there, James. And if we do think about the future once again, before we do wrap things up on today's programme, do give me an idea of what you imagine the next 12 months will hold for yourself and for the business One Space Media, and also what you hope to achieve in that time as well, particularly not just in navigating this situation, but also in emerging from the other side.
Yeah, of course. I mean, I think in some ways we've been quite lucky because, One Space Media, we work typically in life science and medical organisations, which obviously, there's a lot of work for those guys going on at the moment. So we were, I'd like to say it was tactical at the time, but I think that because we're in Cambridge, there's a huge concentration of those types of companies here. So our business is business as usual. But I think for One Space Media, we're really striving to basically be one of the top agencies working in life science and medical companies. We're striving to do great work. We're trying to give opportunities to young people to make our industry stronger, through designers, through development. But I think for me personally, it's about diversifying my day-to-day business life and looking for other opportunities to kind of make me more of a leader, I suppose.
Absolutely, and looking for those opportunities and weighing those up over the next few months is going to be hugely important for businesses. And also, businesses are going to have to change, develop, adapt, and innovate the way that they do things to essentially be ready for the changing market environment as well.
Definitely. I think that, we're obviously the situation is unprecedented, but I hope that in some ways actually there's a positive come out of it. I hope there's greater community spirit. I hope there's a less of a reliance on technology all the time. I think technology has helped in this situation, but there's nothing greater than a good face-to-face meeting or a conversation. I also think that, life may slow down a little bit. I think that the pace of life is potentially, eating us up, especially for those of us who kind of live in cities. You're just rushing around all the time trying to fit a million things into your day, which is often impossible. And I think that this whole experience of being forced to stay at home for so long gives us some opportunity for contemplation and to understand, what we value in life.
I think you're absolutely right. And you know what I also think would be quite fantastic, James, is if in a few months' time, once we start to see things change, if we could maybe have you back on the air again with us to just look at this retrospectively and see just how some of those changes are being borne out, but also to catch up on how the business is doing as well. But for now, it's been an absolute pleasure and incredibly insightful having you on today's programme. And thank you ever so much for taking the time to come on and speak with me today. It's been fantastic.
It's my pleasure. Thanks very much, Scott.
I've really enjoyed it. Thank you so much, James. That was James Cotton from One Space Media. Coming up next on today's programme, I'll be handing over to Jonathan White for his exclusive interview with England's 1966 World Cup hero, Sir Geoff Hurst. A former professional striker who scored over 200 league goals during his career for the likes of West Ham United and Stoke City, Sir Geoff also remains the only man to this day to have scored a hat-trick in the final of a Football World Cup, following his treble in England's 4-2 win over West Germany at the old Wembley Stadium 54 long years ago. I hope you enjoyed listening just as much as Jonathan enjoyed speaking with Sir Geoff, and that's coming up next.
We're now joined, though, by former England footballer and still the only man to score a hat-trick in a World Cup final, Sir Geoff Hurst. Thank you very much for coming on today.
You're welcome. You're welcome. Good afternoon.
And perhaps I should start and get it over and done with. I know you must be bored with it, and you've probably been asked 1,000 times. But when you got out for a duck playing for Essex, Geoff, what was going through your head at the time?
Well, of course, that's not one of the most asked questions I get. Oh, there are one or two people who are very familiar who do Google me, who realise that I did score nothing for Essex. My only game for Essex first team when we played against Lancashire in Liverpool, a place called Egbert in Liverpool. Many, many years ago, 1962, I think that was. So I didn't, I didn't really feel it at the time. It was lucky to be playing, I guess. There were one or two injuries. But the problem that I had was really messing about between the two sports. That was very detrimental to me over that period of time, being stuck between the two sports.
And I think for those that don't know, there's another world that might exist where Sir Geoff Hurst was a first-class cricketer and not perhaps a footballer. But whether it's business or cricket or football, obviously the importance of leadership, it can't be understated, no matter what form that comes in. When you were at West Ham, Jeff, and when Ron Greenwood first came along, he made obviously some pretty radical changes. Was this a man that genuinely inspired confidence the first time you'd meet him?
Absolutely. I mean, he was simply a fantastic coach or teacher, if you like, of football. And the quite always mentioned when we talk about Ron Greenwood, Harry Redknapp, who was played under him and has been very successful as a player and the manager over many, many, many years. He's come across many coaches, of course, and managers during his time over 50 years, I guess. He would still say that Ron Greenwood is the best coach he'd worked with. So you're very fortunate. I think you think you're lucky when you come across, if you have a great teacher at school and a great coach, as we had in Ron Greenwood, and of course a great manager in Sir Alf Ramsey. So to come across people like that, of that calibre, can have a huge influence on your career, of course, and then your life, and that's quite purely the case.
Absolutely. And in those early days at West Ham, with a manager like Ron there, it's also important to have confidence with your other players, and of course they become your friends. Who did you look at the time when to inspire confidence in yourself? Was it Peters?
I think probably. Well, I was very fortunate to play with the calibre of the players I did. Again, extremely fortunate to play with the captain of England and West Ham, and Martin Peters, who was a fantastic player. And as far as Martin's concerned, I think sometimes he didn't quite get the recognition he deserved. What a wonderful player he was. In terms of inspiring confidence, I always probably say that the biggest influence for me, I guess, would be the captain, Bobby Moore. Although he was only about 8 months older than me, he graduated through the system probably 3 or 4 years earlier. He played for England in 62, 4 years before the final when I played. And so he was more, looked upon him more as a senior player, if you like, not as a guy with the same age group as me. And I looked at how he trained, how he acted, how he behaved, and how he played. And so he would say, I would also say he was a big influence on me. One thing I would say about leadership, what I do understand clearly in all walks of life, leadership is at the top, is absolutely vital for a business, a football team, in any walk of life to be successful. And it's quite evident. I was in the motor trade for a long time as well, selling car warranties to car dealerships. And you could almost tell when you walked into the business, many of the car dealerships, you could almost tell from the moment you walked in by initial reaction, people came and welcomed you, that the business was well run or conversely not well run at all. And so I understand the value and quality of leadership. And that's why I'm very fortunate to be involved in my career in those early days with two great leaders in Ron Greenwood and Alf Ramsey.
Absolutely. And since you've already brought him up, Jeff, I think it'd be remiss not to go a little bit further with that. But obviously, after at West Ham, your playing came to the attention of Sir Alf Ramsey. Now, there's a man I'm sure when you walked into a room, you knew who was in charge. When it came to managing that England team, what was his style like, Jeff?
Well, the first thing I say about Alf Ramsey, he's probably over my life the most powerful influence who had on me as a person. Naturally, it happens to an extent because he's got your whole career in his hand. Whether he picks you for England or he doesn't pick you, it can have a great impact on your career and, of course, your life. But in that era, I was involved for 6 or 7 years. It was quite clear who was the boss. He was quite very, very strict. Probably at a time, maybe overly strict, but at times you probably wouldn't necessarily get away with it in today's football because it's changed dramatically in how you deal with players then and players now. But he was the most powerful man I came across, and very few people. And he was quite ruthless in getting people out who didn't want to be part of a group, part of a team. It is important that if you've got a group of people, and that's in any walk of life, they're all singing off the same hymn sheet, and you don't have anybody that's griping or moaning about the system. And if you've got people like that in the organisation, one thing I have learned, and I've taken it on in my life, my family, you've got somebody in the group who doesn't want to be part of it, you get them out. And Alf, I think, was quite ruthless with that in his staff. And I think that's one of the most serious things I think I've learnt over a long period of time.
And is there, do you think, a specific moment? I'm sure there's probably dozens, but is there a specific moment, if you could perhaps pick right now, that did show those qualities in Sir Alf so sharply?
Yes, I think for me, certainly, I think there are instances of players who you thought would be in the team or certainly in the squad, and surprising they were not. There was no necessary reason for it, but looking back, I do think perhaps they were people that Alf didn't think wanted to be part of a group. So that's for me. In terms of my personal view, I think that it looked prior to the World Cup that I was going to be playing in it. Only a few games before I was playing, and I played with Jimmy Greaves in the game against Yugoslavia only a couple of months before the final. And it looked at that stage as if I was going to be playing in the team. But in a couple of more friendly games before the final in Poland and Norway, I think, in Denmark, I played 2 of the 4 games, and I probably didn't quite replicate my form that I'd been showing at West Ham and in the early couple of games for England. And he left me out in the first game of the World Cup against Uruguay. He started off with Jimmy Greaves and Roger Hunt. So I had an impact of thinking at that stage I looked like I was going to play, and didn't start because of just a lack of form. I didn't play quite well enough to justify my position. And somewhat fortuitously, I only got back in the team because of a nasty gash to shin on Jimmy Greaves' leg.
And I think what you've said there, Jeff, actually does sum that up really well. And more than that, whilst it's important to have that someone in charge with those qualities, it's almost useless if there isn't a strong and unified team behind them. And there really must have been moments, maybe there weren't, but let us know, in that 66 competition, the prolonged pressure on all of you, the weight of a nation, did it get to you?
Oh, not for me personally, no. I think, and I don't, not for me, not for a second. I think I was just happy to be involved in the squad initially. Not at all. You're not aware of the magnitude of the occasion, really, looking back out. So I never really felt, people talk about pressure a lot and it's there, and players talk about it in life. I didn't really necessarily feel any great pressure during the time I was there. And what is also important to say about Alf Ramsey, the people he left behind that were left in the squad after he'd moved 1 or 2 players out, the squad were a bunch of very hard-nosed, professional, top-quality people. And that was, again, the leadership that Al showed. He got people in together that were very, very strong personally. And I think that was part of the success we had. We were I always describe our group as hard-nosed professionals. We have some great players, but overall they were great hard-nosed professional players. And great quality people who we've kept in contact with, over the years.
And Jeff, I've got to ask, and I'm not making this up, I've genuinely heard that people do ask you whether or not you realise there were people on the pitch at that moment. I imagine you were busy on something else.
Well, I did some theatre shows last year. They've gone fairly well, and we're going to do a series of theatre shows, in fact, starting this week, over the next 2 or 3 months. And at the end of the theatre shows, we have about 20 minutes where we allow the people in the audience to ask questions. And I won't mention both. They're too long to talk about both questions. The other one's a really stupid one. It's too long for me to tell you. It's absolutely ridiculous. But the other ridiculous question I get asked, did I realise there were people on the pitch? And of course, I jokingly say, yes, I was just about to shoot to score the goal. And I looked round, put my foot on the ball, and looked round for a little while and said, oh dear, there are 6 or 7 people running on the pitch. So I've been asked that once at one of the theatre shows. I make a joke about that and saying, yes, I put my foot on the ball and waited, just had a glance round, you know.
Maybe it does prove there are things such as stupid questions, really.
Yeah, there certainly are. I've got another one which I won't bore you with. It's too long to tell you. I was in a Jersey, or Channel Line, Jersey or Guernsey, 2 or 3 years ago, and most stupid, irrelevant questions, absolutely nothing to do with football whatsoever, which was absolutely, but I can use that now because it is quite funny.
Well, maybe another time then, but we...
well, you want me? I can tell you if you want. You got time? I can tell you if you want.
Jeff, go on. I think it would be silly if I said no at this point.
Okay, so I was doing at a dinner in the Channel Islands, 300 or 400 people, black tie dinner, guest of honour. On this occasion, I was speaking for about 20 minutes, then allowing questions from the audience at the end of the evening. And there was usual football questions, and then all of a sudden I had somebody at the back who asked a question. I didn't quite hear what he said. He didn't have the microphone with him. So I said, I didn't hear what he said. Can you please give this chap the microphone so I can hear clearly what he said? So the chap had the mic and he said, when a turtle loses its shell, is it naked or is it homeless?
Right. What a question. What a question.
I think that would be definitely in the stupid category, wouldn't it? So we had a laugh about that.
You've got to have a patient of a saint, I think, sometimes to put up with things like that. But then again,
I found it amusing. I just found it amusing. In fact, some of the audience found it highly amusing as well. So it did make me laugh that day.
If you can put up with my questions, you can probably put up with anything. But there would have become a point, though, Jeff. I think you were a young man when obviously this happened, when you must have realised that teammates, began looking at you for leadership. Is that something that occurred to you, or did you just realise that by one way or the other, people actually begin to look up for you for inspiration?
Well, possibly. That's never really struck me until you've actually mentioned it now, quite frankly. It's a new question. Does anybody look up to me? I'm sure perhaps there are people who pay you compliments of fans of West Ham and Stoke, and of course England fans who I think probably it would be very immodest of me to suggest I felt that somebody was looking to me for inspiration.
You don't have to, but I will.
It's okay for a third party to do it. Perhaps that may have been the case over the years. People look at you and maybe it has a helpful effect. But I do think you how you behave and set examples on and off the pitches, people must realise that has an influence. How you react and behave to situations on and off the field surely probably has an impact to younger players coming into the team latterly.
And with that, looking at football today, is there anybody that you think particularly on the field or the sidelines that strikes you as someone with those qualities that you could identify in a natural leader?
Well, current players, you mean?
Oh, players, managers, anybody that you look to today, really? Well,
I think some of the outstanding. I think the best example about a leader at the moment is Klopp at Liverpool. He has been absolutely fantastic to acquire the players and get them to. Their attitude is absolutely fantastic. They're great players, but there's more than just being good players in football. It is have a good player with a fantastic attitude, and their willingness to work for each other and the team is absolutely outstanding. Hence these unbelievable results. There are, and the great players not always succeed as individuals, or probably even certainly as a team if you haven't got the right attitude alongside it. And they're probably, and that comes through the leadership. That's not just luck.
Absolutely.
That's absolute leadership. He'd be the best example, of course, in football terms today, easily. And of course, but going back not that long ago, Alex Ferguson, who's just absolutely. You've got to take him as the first example, because Klopp's only done this over a period of time, a short period of time. But if you look at the 26, 27 years that Alex Ferguson did with Manchester United, and subsequently since he's gone, how they are not doing so well. He's the best example of management we've probably ever seen, and I don't think anybody will see the light of that kind of leadership again. It's absolutely astonishing.
And do you think, could you imagine Sir Alf or even Ron Greenwood managing teams today?
Yes, I think so. I think yes, no question at all. I think Ron Greenwood. Yeah, the answer, straightforward answer is yes.
That's a good answer.
The straightforward answer is yes. I can elaborate as much as you want, but the straight answer is absolutely categorically yes.
And with and I know if we could talk about this probably for the next hour or so, but I'm conscious of the time. Looking back through your playing career, perhaps especially your time for England, who was it that struck you more than anyone else on the pitch that displayed qualities of not just leadership but companionship and level-headedness that you think that have stuck with you all these years later?
Well, I think I was very fortunate, and I wouldn't pick any one player out. I think looking at that,
so many,
and that's why we were successful, because we had so many showing all those qualities that you just mentioned throughout the team. I think that was outstanding, and it's an opportunity to talk about all of them in that breath. And there was nobody, and going back from an earlier question for me, all hard-nosed professionals, good teammates, good socially, and that's why we kept in touch with each other on our golf days every year up until about 5 years ago. Of course, with the sadly dwindling numbers, we still got on. Our wives got on all together all those years later. It didn't just finish after '66. That reunion, that camaraderie, that team spirit, getting on with each other lasted for a long time. And I wouldn't, when you put those questions and how you categorise those, I would pick every one of the 11 players who you put in that category that were like that. There was nobody else. They were all outstanding. And I think that was a big part. I can't stress how big a part that was. And I've said that many times, for the success of the team. We had some great players. We had some great players, of course. But without the attitude alongside that, going back to an earlier question, we wouldn't have been as ultimately as successful.
Exactly. Without that, the whole will never be greater than the sum of its parts. But with it,
yes, the word is team. The word is team.
Absolutely.
And I always use the word team when I talk. Sometimes together, everyone achieves more, and that's the same in any walk of life. That's fundamental.
And lastly, Jeff, looking, if you were to give advice, and whether this is in sport or business or indeed any other walk of life, what would you identify, if you can, as the key tenet that you can't go without in terms of leading a team, no matter what that team is?
Single-mindedness, dedication to the job, thinking about that role, that job in leadership all the time. It's a huge part of your life. I don't think you can switch off when you're in business at the top level or sport at the top level. You may, have a couple of weeks holiday, but I'm even sure if these top managers and leaders in all walks of life are away on holiday on a beach somewhere warm, I'm sure they will not switch off for 2 weeks and completely not think about their role as the boss of an organisation. And I think you're completely focused. You're always thinking about things, thinking about improvements, and it's just dedication and tuning your life to being successful.
Excellent. Well, Jeff, on that point, thank you very much for joining us today.
You're welcome. But it's nice to have a talk about this and just go over the past and just refresh my own memory about the quality of the players I grew up with.
Excellent. Another time, it would be great to talk again.
Thank you, Jonathan. Thank you.
This has been the Leaders Council podcast. Thank you for celebrating excellence in leadership with us. I've been your host, Scott Challoner. Until next time, goodbye. Thank you for listening to our podcast. The views expressed within the podcast do not reflect the views of the Leaders Council of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, its parent company or subsidiaries, members of staff, or other guests of any other person therein associated.